Okay, so we'll see if anybody actually turns up live to ask questions here. But this is sort of a very long form follow up to previous sort of edited video I did explaining why landing at San Diego International Airport is sort of notoriously difficult. And I got sort of mixture of questions and comments and other things, and uh, that video was intended as more sort of a, edutainment overview type thing, and this stream is still, relatively, uh, not going into huge amounts of detail, but it's going to be a lot longer and a lot more detailed. That video is only like 10 minutes long. It just shows, sort of essentially a visual approach to the runway in good conditions. And today what I'm doing is going through one, two, three, four, five different instrument approaches in different weather conditions to sort of showcase where a lot of the difficulty really lies in landing at our airport here. So to start off, here is the airport just on Google Earth. So this is going to make it. Oh, where's the tape? Oh, there's the tape measure. That's good. This is going to make it a lot easier to understand where the difficulty really comes from, because it's one of those things where it's like the thing that's most visually striking about landing at our airport is as you come in, almost always you land facing to the west, right? Coming in from the east, facing to the west, landing on runway 27, aka landing on this piece of tarmac facing on a magnetic heading of 27 or 275 degrees, and then it's rounded, so it's 274.5 degrees. Rounded down is 270 degrees to get the runway number. So you'll notice that on the left, there's all the buildings of downtown. And that's very visually striking, and it's really cool if you get a chance to fly into our airport and you can get a window seat on the left side and see all the downtown buildings. Or you can get a window seat on the right side and you can see Balboa Park over here, which is also really pretty. And it's a spectacular sight. And in good weather, it's not even that hard to do the landing. And of course, good weather gives you a good view, but, today is going to be all about how, well, you don't always have good weather. We frequently have good weather here in San Diego, which is why our airport has always had sort of a mixed reputation. On the one hand, we have pretty good weather, so it's usually not too bad. But on the other hand, there are certain weather conditions that can arise that can make it extremely difficult. And some of those weather conditions are actually not even that rare, because we rarely have, huge storms or anything, but we frequently have somewhat low cloud ceilings from sort of you know overcast marine layer in the mornings, or also in the evenings sometimes. But so one thing you'll notice right away is that when you're looking at it from this angle, where you're sort of facing straight down the runway, rather than looking off to the side, the buildings are definitely there, and it's it's a little bit scary. You don't want to deviate too far to the left because they are right there, but they're not actually directly underneath the path that you fly. And for that matter, neither of these buildings over here. In fact, if you look, you'll see right under the approach corridor, there actually are no tall buildings. And so people will sometimes, comment like, oh, why do we allow them to build buildings under the approach corridor? It's like, well, we basically don't, right? You can build tall buildings over here in Bankers Hill. You can build tall buildings here in downtown, but right under the approach course, they actually don't let people build tall buildings. And there's also the infamous parking structure right here that's right under the departure end of the runway, and that is right under the approach corridor, and it's a really cool place to go and sit and watch the planes. But for reasons I'll show in just a second, that's actually not the limiting factor, right? All of those things do increase the difficulty level, and they do play into why it's hard, and they look really cool. But the thing that actually makes it hard is at some level, much simpler, and it's just the hills, right? It's a little bit harder to see because you got the buildings of downtown right there, and I'm going to show you some plots that make it clear. But you look, there's these hills right here that are just to the east of the runway, and those are the real problem. And the problem for two reasons. One, Unlike buildings, you can't really control where the hills are. You can control where the runway is, but unfortunately, our airport got built. It actually got built the year before instrument landing systems were invented, which is kind of unfortunate timing because they built it without that as a consideration. And also, it was built, before this expansion happened. And at the time, this actually seemed like a good spot. It's like, oh, it's a nice piece of flat land. Nobody's really using it for anything. There's some hills to the east and to the west, but this is a 9,000-foot runway. And at the time it was built, jet airplanes did not exist yet, and approach and landing speeds were much slower. And airplanes were also much less heavy. So it was all honky-dory at first, but over the years, San Diego has expanded, and there's really nowhere else to put the airport, because everywhere that's not built is being used by the military. So there's another airfield here, but that's Naval Air Station North Island, and there was a brief sort of back and forth about putting it over here, Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, which used to be Naval Air Station Miramar, where they used to have Top Gun. And it's like, well, why don't you put it over here then? It's like, well, because that's right next to Miramar, and in fact, most of this land is also part of the Miramar base, even if it's not being taken up by runway. And we actually had the chance to do that at one point, but the county or the city or whatever opted not to, because they didn't want to lose the economic benefits of having an additional military base. And that was back when all the bases were being closed in the early 90s. And subsequently, there was a whole kerfuffle where people kind of changed their mind, but it was too late. And so, I don't know. Anyways, not getting into all that, but case in point, there's nowhere else to put the runway. And there's no chance of really building a second one. It's like, why not build a second one over here? Well, A, this is also taken up by a military base, which is Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego. And B, even if you did, the hills are even steeper over there, so that would only exacerbate the problem. The only thing that it would alleviate is you could at least alleviate some of the congestion, because you could use the second runway for takeoffs, and then use this runway for landings. But also, you're not getting that spot. It ain't happening. So we're stuck with this runway. So let me showcase why it's actually hard, though. So let me get out of Google Earth here, and instead switch to my PDF viewer here. Hold on. OBS is not my forte, although I do like OBS. By no means much of a streamer. Okay, there we go. All right, so there is, let me make sure that's full screening correctly. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is what the glide slope antennas for an instrument landing system look like. And so if you don't know, I mentioned this in the previous video, airplanes get guided in to land when they're operating under instrument flight rules, where they can't see anything outside, or if they're just operating under the same set of rules. Because it's instrument flight rules. Just think there's also instrument meteorological conditions, which is when you can't see, and then there's instrument flight rules, which is what you are obliged to operate under when you are in instrument meteorological conditions, which you can also operate under instrument flight rules even if you can see. In fact, that's also what you have to do at high altitudes. This is a diagram of what the sort of antenna, the radiation patterns coming out of a glide slope antenna look like, right? Because when you're operating under instrument flight rules, you use a combination of a localizer, which, again, I flew the sort of a mixture of a visual and a localizer approach in the previous video, and showed where if you are able to use horizontal guidance, but no vertical guidance under visual conditions, it's actually not that hard. But under instrument conditions, it really helps to have vertical guidance, where you have this upper lobe that is the high side and this lower lobe, which is the blue side. And when they overlap is when you're on glide slope and descending, you're descending at the appropriate angle towards the airport. But glide slope antennas don't actually work quite like this most of the time. Some of them actually do, but usually they operate like this, where where's the example? Yeah, where you see it's reflected off of the ground. But you might also say, well, why not, if it's reflected, A, why is it reflected off the ground, and B, sort of why, oh, there we go. So I was skipping. So yeah, so they don't actually look like, um, which one is it? Yeah, they don't actually look like this. They actually look like this, right? Where they get face down, reflected off the ground, and then the lower one you see this way, and it's like, why bother doing that? Um, and it's complicated, but the short answer is because it's going to happen anyways, right? You know, you see, if you did just have them emanate from the same point, like this, A, there are some disadvantages already of doing that, but B, the lower lobe is going to touch the ground no matter what you do. And in fact, it's going to reflect off the ground no matter what you do. So it's better to just sort of make use of that effect. And you can actually, there's actually some benefits of doing it that way because it offsets these a little bit, or it offsets the sort of, the virtual origin point of this reflected signal, which is actually beneficial. But you might ask, why not just make them narrower? Well, because that defeats the purpose of having a glide slope, right? You need to have the glide slope, you need to be able to guide you from a point that's not on glide slope to being on glide slope, right? And if it's super narrow like that, then it'll only work if you're extremely close to the center, which kind of doesn't completely defeat the purpose because, you generally want to, intercept the glide slope generally from below. And then once you're on the glide slope, which is the intersection between the red and the blue, you want to stay on it. But, if they're too narrow, it doesn't really work because you'll intercept it, and then as soon as you do, you'll immediately be on the high side, and it'll just be too hard to stay in the center. But so they almost all operate like this, but this requires flat land, and there are some ILS antennas, glide slope antennas that are able to operate without this ground reflection, but they also have some requirements, and when you have really steep hills like we have in San Diego, it still just doesn't quite work. Okay, so but thing number two here is, what about those, what about the actual angle of the glide slope? Because the angle of the glide slope here is not that steep. It's actually 3.5 degrees, which in the grand scheme of things is actually not that bad. And so you might ask, like, okay, well, why do they allow those parking structures then, right? Because this little red arrow is showing where the parking structures are. And in fact, let me zoom in a little bit and see our runway here has what's called a displaced threshold, right? So here is where you can start your takeoff run all the way at the end of the runway, but it's not until you get all the way over here, where these sort of white hash marks are, that you can actually land, is from this point on. And so if we look at what I have plotted here is just the elevation profile taken from Google Earth, you'll see that these two spikes here are actually the freeway. And so you notice that the highest point, if you make a line from the very top of the hill over here in Balboa Park, down to the beginning of the runway, the parking structure is actually, it goes all the way up to that line, but it doesn't go any higher. Right, so the parking structure is actually not in the way because it's right on this sort of tie line here between there and the top of the hill. But the glide slope, right, this is not the scale, right? The vertical scale is completely different from the horizontal scale, right? This is like, the top of this is like 250 feet, versus this horizontal scale is showing like 3 miles, right? So it's like not even close in scaling. So here's what that looks like, so here, again, this little mark here, there's where you can actually land. There's the, beginning of the full runway, not just the displaced threshold part of the runway. Or there is the actual runway threshold is right there. And there's the end of the runway as allowed for takeoffs. And again, if you plot a line from the point on the hill up there over to there, over to here, the parking structure is actually well below it. And again, same thing, but just looking, arrow pointing to where the parking structure actually is, looking on Google Maps. And then finally, this steep line right here, that is what 3.5 degrees looks like on this scale. Again, vertical and horizontal are not set equal scaling here, right? So the vertical scale is much, much, much larger than the horizontal scale. So this, the actual geometric angle on screen here is like 40 degrees, but this is what a 3.5 degree glide slope looks like when using this horizontal scale and this vertical scale. And so now, the next thing I have to discuss before I finally open up the simulator is, and this is where I have to thank Flight Insight, fantastic channel with a lot of very good free instrument flying and other general aviation instruction lessons. Because I'm actually not instrument rated in real life. I've only ever flown VFR in real life and visual flight rules. So when it's nice and clear and you can see out and you're allowed to just use your eyes to look for other air traffic instead of having to operate on instruments and under the control of air traffic control. So you need to understand the difference though between precision and non-precision approaches, because we have at San Diego, and I'll get into this, we do have some precision approaches, but we mostly have non-precision approaches. And the key difference is that on a precision approach, you keep descending continuously until you reach what's called a decision height. And once you reach that decision height, if you can see the runway before at or before the decision height or decision altitude, you can continue all the way and land. But if you can't see it, then you have to execute what's called a missed approach and sort of abandon your landing attempt and go around and either divert somewhere else where the weather is better or try again. Which, depending on your fuel state and other factors, it's up to you which of those things you want to do, although some airlines have rules about when they can and can't try again. If you're a private pilot, you have your own discretion about whether or not you want to try again. There's nothing inherently dangerous about trying again after a missed approach, but a combination of fuel management and human psychology can sometimes make it dangerous, just because people get stuck into the sunk cost fallacy of thinking, oh, I tried it X many times, I've got to make it this time. And it's like, well, as long as you have fuel to keep trying and fly to your alternate and make multiple attempts at your alternate, you can keep trying, with no intrinsic hazard, as long as you, don't, violate any of the procedures of the instrument approach. But unfortunately, it's usually a good idea to only try once or twice before going to an alternate airport, because just of the nature of human psychology, even if you do have enough fuel for multiple attempts, because people will get increasingly desperate to get down, which if you're getting low on fuel, it should not be a question. You should just divert. And if you're not getting low on fuel, then there should really be no worry. You just, keep trying until either you do get low on fuel and you divert, low enough on fuel based on your pre-calculated minimums, or until, you just, make it down. But human psychology being what it is, it can be kind of dangerous, so it's often better to just divert after, one missed approach. But again, it depends. So, but that's a precision approach, right? You descend down there. There's also something called a non-precision approach, which is, says less precise. And in a non-precision approach, you have what's called a minimum descent altitude. And minimum descent altitude is, instead of descending down to a decision height, you descend to the minimum descent altitude and then level off. And in a sense, it's, at least on the face of it, sounds better, because instead of descending continuously and as soon as you hit the decision altitude, you have to, if you don't have the runway, you have to go missed. In a non-precision approach, you level off at the minimum descent altitude, and then you continue to fly horizontally until you reach what's called the missed approach point, which is a horizontal point, at which point you have to also go missed. But of course, as you might imagine, the minimum descent altitude is basically always going to be above the decision altitude for the same runway. But one of the caveats, which is what I've been sort of getting towards for San Diego International, is we have mostly non-precision approaches. We also do have some precision approaches, but the decision altitude for our precision approach for runway 27 is actually just barely below the minimum descent altitude for the non-precision approaches. And we also, again, if you're landing on the other runway, so runway 9, so same piece of tarmac, just facing, you know, west to east instead of east to west, on a bearing of 090 degrees, that runway does have a full instrument landing system because the terrain on that side of the runway, let me flip Google Maps again, is actually, oh, there we go, is actually quite a bit flatter. It still does have some hills to it. Like if I let me go up here, if I plot along the runway heading, no, move that. If I plot along the runway, the direction of the runway out over you know, Point Loma, Ocean Beach here, and let me show elevation profile. You can see there is a peak there, but it's only it's 190 feet, and also it's considerably further away from the end of the runway that 190 feet is. It's like over a mile away, versus on this side, on the approach end of runway 27, it's a, oh, other way. It's the hill is 225 feet, and it's less than half a mile away, right? Yeah, 2.04, yeah. It's like less than half a mile, and it's twice as high. So it's a much steeper angle on this side than it is on this side. And so runway 9 does have a full instrument landing system, because they can just have the, I'm actually not sure if they have the reflected style of ILS antenna, or if they have the like direct style, which is, what's it called, end fire it's called, where you don't use this reflection technique. But regardless, I don't think that runway 27 is a candidate even for an end fire antenna, because it's just too steep. Even you know, even despite it being, you know, as I say, like not that steep, right? A 3.5-degree glide slope is actually not that steep in the grand scheme of things. But it's steep enough to preclude, definitely preclude reflection style antennas, and I think it's even too steep to permit the use of end fire antennas. And runway 9 might actually have an end fire antenna. I'm not sure if it's an end fire or if it's a reflection style. But regardless, it's just too steep on this side, and the glide slope itself is not that bad, but it is definitely quite steep. Like, you know, for an airliner, 3.5 degrees is pretty steep. For a general aviation plane, right? The faster you fly, the bigger a deal it is to have to descend on a steep glide slope, right? Because if you're in a small little Cessna, A, you can fly a lot slower, and B, you have a much easier time arresting your sink rate because you're in a smaller airplane with less mass, and generally with a lower wing loading too. You know, a less weight per wing area. So the bigger and heavier an airplane is and the faster it flies, the more difficult it is to fly on a steep glide slope. And 3.5 degrees is much steeper than standards. The standard is 3 degrees, so 3.5 degrees is like almost 20% steeper, and that actually does make a significant difference. But it's a combination of the fact that you have to come in at that steeper angle, and the fact that there's no vertical guidance, and, as I'm about to show you, the fact that even when you do get to use a precision approach, you really don't... oh, hold on, where did my PDF go? If I didn't... No, I still have it open. Yeah, even when you do have a precision approach, the minimum descent altitude and the decision altitude are fairly high. So, all right, let's now go to the actual approach plate. Okay, so now we can finally go to the simulator. This is why this is live and not pre-recorded. It's going to be so friggin' long. So that was just the opener. So now we're finally ready for the simulator part. Okay. There's my PowerPoint. Okay, so first off, I'm going to show you, just for reference, let me close Google Earth. That's going to take up, that takes a bit of RAM. Okay, so I'm using X-Plane this time, because I know people were sort of complaining about the visuals in what's it called? Flight Gear. I love Flight Gear because I love open source things, but admittedly it does have potato graphics. But the reason I'm using X-Plane is because X-Plane has probably the best, or at least for, you know, my level of knowing how to do things, the best avionics, and I can load the instrument approaches more easily. And you can do it in Flight Gear, it just takes a little bit more finagling. And I think you could do it in Microsoft Flight Simulator too, but again, more finagling, and X-Plane was built originally as an IFR simulator, and so unsurprisingly, that's, you know, to date what it's best at. Oh, right, I'm paused, that's why. It's like, why is the APU starting? Okay. So, I originally was going to start, I didn't think the intro was going to take quite that long, so I originally started with the APU off. um, so I'll just take a second here to get everything started. The APU only takes about, like, I think 30 seconds to start. So once the EGT starts to go down, as the APU is started. See, how long have I been going for so far? Only 25 minutes for the intro. All right, there we go. Power available. All right, power on. Turn on all the hydraulic pumps. Turn on the bleed valve. Fuel pumps. All right, don't need the center because they're empty. Turn on lights because they're not. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and program in a flight plan. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be flying this visual approach here. This is the Sweetwater visual. So for this one, we're going to be pretty lackadaisical. We're just going to plug in. We're actually going to start flying from Miramar just because it makes it a little bit easier to get to the initial waypoints, because Miramar is off to the north of San Diego International a little bit. Let's be American Airlines Flight 42. Goes Douglas Adams. Okay. Scoot. All right. And departing from runway 24 right. And we are going to land runway 27. Oh, it doesn't actually have the visual. I mean, it's a visual approach, so it doesn't really need anything in there. Yeah, I actually don't really need to do anything after that. Okay. I mean, it's a visual approach, right? So let me just check the altitude. It's recommended, but nonetheless, let's tune the let's set the MCP altitude to 5,000 feet, and let's go ahead and start our engines here. Right, engine number 1 start. There we go. And all right, engine number 2 start. Generator on. Right, engine number 2 start. Make sure our flaps are down. So be from the outside. Okay. And let's go ahead and add Lindy in there. Add it. You know, I'm mostly going to be ignoring that. Actually, I should delete that. Stepping. Yeah. Alright, well, it doesn't really matter. This is going to be the visual approach, so. Alright, clicks off. Start taxing it. Just live out my daydreams of flying this. Well, actually, I'd rather fly a fighter from Miramar, but this is fun too. And so this right now is real-world weather, because as mentioned, we frequently have quite nice weather in San Diego. And this is why I'm about to show you, the first approach I'm about to show you is actually fairly easy, despite the relatively steep glide slope. Just because it's a visual approach. And oh right, I gotta turn the pause. Turn the yaw damper on. Oh. There's Mount Soledad off in the distance there. Right, rotate. You're up. Go ahead, enter CLS. Goes down a little, turning to the left. And speed. Let's just do 200 knots. We can get the flaps back down. No, that's trouble. And let's do vertical speed 3000. And let's do again, all of those waypoints are just kind of recommendations. So there's Montgomery Field right there. Did I even get the flaps? Did I even get the flaps on? No. And pull them up real quick. And let's just look them off right here. On heading 095. So I'll just fly this heading for a minute. And again, this is a visual approach, so I'm gonna make sure, I'm pretty sure I already have the localizer tuned. I do. So just for fun, let's pull up the localizer, but we're not guiding ourselves with the localizer, we're guiding ourselves visually. So let's make sure to look outside. So we want to fly over Lake Murray, which is, where is it? Right there. Oh, right there. Okay. Alright, so fly over Lake Murray, and then before that mountain up there, we want to make a right turn. Go ahead and drop our speed to 75. No. Alright. Level off 3000 here. And Eh, off the auto throttle. Can you tell I have never flown IFR or an airliner in real life? Here, extend the flaps. It's a beautiful day outside. Really not that hard. Turn the landing lights on. There's North Island. Hey, there's the runway. And X-Plane not known for its visuals, although the visuals in X-Plane 12.1 are actually decently nice. But you see it's sort of taking its time loading the beautiful views of the downtown scenery there. Yeah, if you want good visuals, you can fly MSFS. If you want, you know, more accurate flight models, you can fly X-Plane. Although some of the Microsoft Flight Simulator models are actually quite good. I prefer Flight Gear over either, because I like free and open source, but I definitely like X-Plane more than Microsoft Flight Simulator. Although I will admit, Microsoft Flight Simulator 3 is pretty... Oh, there's the Tornado Bridge, which is custom scenery, but it is free custom scenery. And, you know, we're a little bit to the right there. The actual center of the runway. My screen's only 1080p here. And again, not really too hard. A little high. Just dip the nose. Oh, did I forget to disconnect? Oh, I mean, I forgot to disconnect, but I was in CWS, so it's fine. Again, approaching a little fast. The engines, because we're also still high. And really should use more so use power to control glide slope, and more so use pitch to control speed, but you always use both for both. Again, nothing too hard about it. Just coming on in. There's the runway. See, there's the PAPI lights. We're high. 500. Power to 0. Sync rate. This isn't the most stabilized approach in the world, but it's fine. Bring back in a little power, make sure we flare fine. And we're just flying a 737. We got lots of runway. 30. This is not my best landing, but it's alright. Thrust reverses out. Max manual braking. Oh, we're good. Alright, so that actually was pretty easy. Because again, guess what? I can see. But, as discussed, you can't always see. So let's flaps up, track speed brakes, and, you know, blah blah blah, taxi the gate, etc., etc. Okay, so that's pretty easy. But that's because we're flying VFR. Now, let's try the same thing, flying from Miramar Air Station over to San Diego International, but this time, instead of using real-world weather, which is, you know, a nice, beautiful day outside, and probably later I will go enjoy said beautiful day when it cools off a little bit. It's a little bit too beautiful today, and it's in fact quite warm. So, alright, but we'll start from there, and instead of using real-world weather, we will go ahead and manually enter some weather. And I'm decently happy with this wind, but to make things a little more interesting, let's add an overcast layer with a base of, let's make this one fairly easy. Let's set this to 1,000 feet. And let's set the top at, oh, let's not make it, let's set the top at 4,500. That sounds good. Okay, so overcast from, let's do, there we go. Let's do 1,000 even. Overcast. Oh, my goodness. Come on. 1,000. 4,000. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to leave the wind how it is because the wind is almost always blowing from west to east because we get the onshore breeze. Okay, so now let's try that again. But where, you know, we can still see anything under, you know, 1,000 feet, but until we get below 1,000 feet, we can't see. So now, we can't use the visual approach anymore. Because if we look back to that visual approach plate, it says, let's see, where does it say it? Zoom out. It says minimums 5,000 feet. Oh yeah, it doesn't have that. Oh yeah, there we go. Radar required and weather minimums 5,000 foot ceiling, 10 miles visibility. So, I don't know if you can see what I'm seeing. Definitely don't have either one of those anymore. And this is not uncommon weather for San Diego, especially in the morning. It's not raining, and, you know, we're not getting any crazy winds, but we do have pretty low ceilings here. Okay, so now let's go to the localizer approach, which is a non-precision approach. I already have the localizer tuned, but let's program it into the computer here. So, NKX, which is Miramar, to San Diego. Let's be AA42 again. And let's set our departure to 4 right. And our arrival, localizer 27, Lindy, enter. And then do the, those of you who know the drill, we gotta copy the waypoint. No, not this again. Oh, right. Always makes you enter that first waypoint. Oh, I hate programming flight computers. I should be better at it since I am by trade. Well, I'm not a software developer by trade. I'm a physicist. All right. And gotta enter things in order or it freaks out. There we go. And go to flight plan. Alright, now we are good. Okay. Alright, auto arm. Flats 5. Wait for them to. Down. Yes, yes, I know. It's complaining because the flaps aren't down and because I'm holding the brakes. Alright, there we go. Do not do that in real life. So, already you can see a key difference, or rather, you can't see. 5, rotate. Positive rate, gear up. Turn on flight directors. And LNAV. Oh, right. And let's go ahead and program in our altitudes. 6,000. 6,000. And make me do 4,000. Also, don't, in real life, program your flight plan while you're on climb out. But it's fine. It's a simulator for demonstration purposes. Okay. Yeah, we actually don't have being out for this approach anyway, so it's actually not correct to use it. But you notice, what can you see out the left window? Cloud. What do you see out the right window? More cloud. Yep, there's the top of the cloud layer. Alright, so now let's look back at this approach plate. So, starting from this waypoint, Vita, we want to be at 4,000 feet. So, that will keep us clear of all this terrain here. So, let me get us down to 4,000. And let's get the speed up a little bit. I'm not even going to bother retracting the flaps this time. But again, notice, what do you see? Let's turn on the landing lights. What do you see out of every window? In fact, even if I go to outside view, what do you see? Whole lot of nothing. So this time we're going to be using the Localizer, which is what I demonstrated a combination Localizer visual approach in the previous video. This is going to be just the Localizer, because I made the visibility effectively 0, although the cloud base is up at 1,000 feet, which is going to make things not too bad. Because, remember, this is a non-precision approach, which means it has a minimum descent altitude, rather than a decision height, and that minimum descent altitude is 680 feet. We're waiting until we get out to this waypoint, Windy. And then we're going to flip a UE over to Vita. Vita. BYDDA. I actually don't... Usually the waypoints are names based on something. I have no idea what that's based on, actually. Center fuel pumps. Center tanks are empty. Alright, so once we start turning around, I will... Oh, actually, I should already turn on. At 110.9, which is the Localizer frequency. Again, look what we see outside. What we see outside from the passenger window. Look what we see outside from the cheater view from being the video game. Look what we see from the first officer's side. Look what we see from the center. A whole lot of nothing. There, we're flipping our UE there. So let's get over to the approach. Alright, DME 15. So I'm gonna set it to 2,000 feet. I'm gonna get us down to 150 knots. Oop, that's too slow. Drop the landing gear. Drop the flaps the rest of the way. Again, this is not correct procedure, and we're starting to intercept the localizer, so as we do, I'm going to switch from following those GPS waypoints to getting on the localizer. Alright, and level change. So now we're starting at 14 miles out, descending at, oh, no, that's actually not the button I wanted. I wanted vertical speed, but that's okay, because the descent rate I wanted was, is. That's a little bit dangerous, because I got very slow. Alright, so we want to descend at 900 feet per minute, going 150 knots, which gives us a minus 3.5 degree glide slope. And we are going to be kept horizontally on course by the localizer, but we still can't see anything, can we? Alright, MCP speed, 150 knots, VOR loc, keeping us on the localizer, and descending 900 feet per minute down to 2,000 feet at 6.5 miles at the final approach fix of Rebo. If we go back to map view, those waypoints are still there. So wait a minute now. Wait. Oh, there we go. Let's get you now. America 93-787. Turn left heading 150. Turn left head 150. America 93-787. I think I calculated 900 feet for 155. So ultimately, though, what I'm going to want to do, actually 9 miles, 2,700, I'm going to go ahead and drop this all the way down to 700 feet. Because remember, our minimum descent altitude is 680, so the nearest 100 feet is 700, and you should always round up. So I'm going to have it fly us down to 700 feet, which will be 300 feet below the cloud deck here. I don't know why it's doing, it should be doing minus 900 feet. Okay. It's back on the glide slope here. We're a little bit high right now. 7 miles, 2,000 feet. Actually, that's pretty close. No, we're good. We're good. Actually, if anything, we're being a little bit low. Because at 6.5, we want to be at 2,000, so we're 200 feet low right now. That's actually, yeah, you couldn't do that, but again, it's a simulator. I'm not, this is not, I am not a CFI, this is not flight instruction. This is just, to showcase where the difficulty really comes from. And I realize this is not even the really difficult approach, because we're going to break out of the clouds soon. And when we do, it's going to get substantially easier, although it keeps ending up these really inconsistent descent rates. I think it's because the when I added the weather, it made everything unstable. Yeah, you can see the autopilot's really struggling to hold that. Flaps are down, aren't they? Yeah. Just kind of turbulent. Make sure our seatbelt sign is on. Very important detail there. I mean, in real life, it is important. Okay. I see that green line shows us when we are going to reach our minimum descent altitude, and it keeps fluctuating because it's really turbulent out. Alright, 1,100. We should break out of the clouds soon. Just get a little faster, just make sure we actually get down. So I really don't want to go missed and have to do this all over again. Don't want to descend below 700 though. And oh, there we go. Breaking out of the clouds, we can see there's the runway. This is like the world's least stable approach, but don't worry about it. Sync rate. And so you see, that's what actually makes it hard. Is the fact that even when I've artificially set it so that to make it easier, see, yeah, if you actually saw the runway at that point, you would go missed. The missed approach point is 1.3 miles, which I'm pretty sure I busted right through that, but it's fine. Say we got down on the runway, it's fine. See, so that was a little bit harder. And in fact, the only reason I didn't go missed there is because I don't want to have to do this all over again. And in reality, you would go missed if you saw the runway that late. Because again, the missed approach point, if you look over here, is 1.3 miles. And, let's see, I could pull up the replay just to see where we broke through the clouds. What is it? Oh, it's Alt-R, but that pulls up my, Alt-R. But I have that stupid NVIDIA thing that opens instead. Okay, so we do Alt-R. Let's go back into replay mode. Rewind. Now it's going to have to think for a second while it loads. That is a much steeper than a 3.5 degree glide slope. So, maybe I didn't quite bust through it. Oh, let's see. So DME 1 point, no, actually I was, according to the charts, I was actually legal here because I have side of the runway. DME says 1.9. The missed approach point is DME 1.3. So technically, this is kosher. The descent angle I flew afterwards, not so much. But strictly speaking, this would be a valid point to descend from. I wouldn't recommend it, but technically you could. Okay, so that's sort of medium mad weather with a 1,000-foot ceiling. Now, let's do it like Limbo and go lower. Firm and customize. Let's bring those ceilings down to, let's bring those down to, what should we do? Let's bring them down to, let's bring them all the way down to 650. Oh wait, that's the top. Base is at 650, 650 feet MSL. Alrighty, that should do. Done. Alright, start new flight. Start new flight. see how long. Let's see how we're doing on time. Only 1 hour, and we've only flown 2 of the approaches. Only 3 more to go. Alright, so same drill. Program the flight computer. Starting at Miramar. Flying San Diego. I don't know what changed about the... I don't know why it changed the... Did I actually bring the ceilings down? Okay, whatever. It must have changed the surface visibility a little bit, but alright. You can still see the ceiling at 680. Alright. Flight number. Not necessary, but just put it in there. One waypoint in. Departure. Arrival. And this time, we are going to use a GPS approach instead of a localizer approach. And that's going to make things a little bit easier. So this, not the ILS, we want the RNAV 27 Yankee, because there's 2 approaches, one of which is a precision approach, but the other which is non-precision. So we're going to do the non-precision GPS approach first. And we are going to go missed this time, because I set the weather to where there's no other possible outcome. Okay, there we go. Alright, we are all good to go. All throttles armed. Set altitude 4,000. Okay, so now let's look at the approach plate for the RNAV Yankee. So we're going to fly in from this initial approach fix at Lindy at 4,000 feet. So let's also program in our 4,000 foot.
American 9932. Go around immediately. Runway lock. Contact San Diego International.
Altitudes.
119.6.
All right. And are good to go. And turn the flight directors on. See, every time I remember a few more things. Yeah, good to go. Oh, I just realized that that was a... Put them all down. How useful. Alright. Rotate. That's great. Gear up. And looking for when we hit that cloud layer. Should be about now. 900,000 feet, and we're looking to it. Okay. Level off. Need to level change. And down there. Up. Alright. It'll let us select go now. Any minute now. Has to be on the intercept heading. Well, Let's just go direct to Windy. Alright, so now we're flying a GPS approach. So now, instead of using the localizer antennas, we are going to fly using these GPS waypoints right here. And this is still going to be a non-precision approach, because there's no vertical guidance associated directly with these waypoints. There's recommended altitudes, or rather there's altitudes you're required to stay above. Oh, that's the RNAV Zulu, that's the precision one. So there's these altitudes that you're required to stay above, and we're going to want to descend so that we hit these altitudes, but the waypoints themselves, when we program them into the computer, don't come with those altitudes. So we're going to start at 4,000 feet.
America 9932, turn left.
And
0,
descends down,
Turn left at 0,
progressively descends down
9932.
until we reach the minimum descent altitude, which again is going to be actually the same as with the localizer. It's going to be 680 MSL left. So we can't descend below 680 feet. And if you're curious, the tallest building in downtown San Diego is 500 feet, and the highest point on that hill is just under 300 feet. So 680 feet will keep us well clear of anything on the ground, and that's why that's the minimum descent altitude, is that it's a altitude you can descend to and be assured of clearing any obstacles in the vicinity of the final approach. Kind of want to speed this up, but I'm afraid it will break something, so let's do 4 times speed, so we're not sitting around waiting quite so long to get to the initial approach fix. Right. Back to normal. Okay, so there's Lindy again, so same initial approach fix. Again, what do we see? Whole lot of nothing. And we're going to want to descend, once we are on that, once we're on Vita again, we're going to want to start descending down to 2,000. And again, same angle of 3.5 degrees. So as we start turning, let me drop our speed.
America 9932, turn left heading 330.
Turn left at
Autopilot kind of struggling because of the turbulence.
9932.
Right. Here,
Bank angle,
let's
bank
do
angle.
not collapse. What's it feeling, Alex? Flipping a U-turn here. Yeah. Something. It is currently proceeding direct to Beta. Don't know quite what it's doing, but might have to tell it to go direct. No, it's already doing that. No, there we go. It's a little bit boring, I know, because you can't see anything, but again, this is where the real complexity lies, is when you have to operate IFR and can't see.
Turn left, heading 240. Report established localizer. Runway 24 right.
Turn left, heading 240. Report established localizer, runway 24 right. American 9932. American 9932. On localizer.
American 9932. Clear instrument approach. Runway 24 right. Contact Miramar Marine Corps Air Station Tower. 135.
Oh, hello. Yeah, thanks.
Runway 24 right. Contact Miramar Marine Corps Air Station Tower. 135.
Sorry, this is kind of a
American
long explanation anyways. I think I'm at well over an hour. But yeah, thanks for popping by. Okay. 1 mile to that waypoint. Alright, so now I'm going to select 2,000 feet and enter V-speed mode, 900 foot per minute descent. So that's the calculated speed for 3.5 degree descent.
Radar contact.
San Diego International Altimeter 2995.
So we want to hit 2,000 feet, I think, at Rebo. Let's pull up the plate, check. Yes, 2,000 feet at Rebo. So that green line should be right over Rebo whenever it stabilizes.
Turn right, heading 330. Resume mode navigation.
Turn right, heading 330.
Okay.
Resume mode navigation. 5 Foxtrot Mike.
Alright. Alright, let's drop that to 800 foot per minute. So we don't want to go below 2,000 feet before Rebo. No, that might have been too much. No, we're good. I want to increase the approach speed a little bit. In case, also increase that. Okay, so now that we're stabilizing approaching Rebo, now I'm going to drop this down to the minimum descent altitude. Remember, it's going to be 700 feet. So this is a GPS approach, an RNAV approach. RNAV is area navigation, so instead of having to follow a localizer antenna, we can navigate using the GPS, but we're still flying a non-precision approach, and so as such, we are still obligated to level off at the minimum descent altitude until we have the runway in sight. And I've set the cloud bases in such a way that we are not going to be able to get side of the runway, at least if I didn't mess something up. Let's see. So that's that. Alright, there we go. So we want to get down to... Yeah, we want to get down in advance of the runway, because I want to demonstrate where we're going to go missed, because I should actually follow them. I should have actually read the missed approach procedure. Let's see, fly out on fly to 2500 on 275 still. And go to SARS. Okay. I mean, it'll automatically, the computer, the flight management computer will automatically pull us there. 3 miles to go. It's a bit faster. 1500 foot per minute. So we get. Oh, we're actually not going mist. I should have set the cloud base lower. Well, so we can see the ground, but not the runway. Remember, you have to see the runway, not just some. It's not going to just see something. You have to specifically see the runway. But you can see the ground, which means I probably won't have to go mist. Yep, there's the runway. Okay, so in fact, this is actually a more stable approach than the one we flew last time, just because I increased the descent rate so that we weren't sky high. Yeah, what gives? The ceilings are supposed to be... Well, I guess it's because it lets the... it continues to model weather with a physics model of some sort. So the ceilings are actually higher than they should be. We're still high here.
50, 40, 30,
Okay.
20, 10.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I have the auto brake on. Well, we were supposed to go mist there, but yeah, I'll let you with those cloud bases. Okay, so let's customize this again. View clouds at 650 MSL. Alright, let's bring those even lower. Let's bring them down to 500 MSL. Make this almost impossible. And this time, we are going to fly the precision GPS approach. Make sure we have fuel. Yeah, let's just top back off. Okay. So now we're going to try to make it down with a ceiling of 500 feet. And we're going to... I should have set the ceiling to 500 all the way down to 500 feet for that last one. But we're going to see if we can make it down using the GPS precision approach. And so, naturally, well... Actually, let's get airborne, and then I'll show you the plate, just because it takes a minute to execute everything. So, alright, you know the drill by now if you've been watching. Miramar, San Diego, Mission Bay, Wartac, Archer, or right, arrival. And this time, go to the next page. We are going to do the RNAV Zulu for runway 27. And that is a precision approach. So we are going to use our vertical guidance. So it's going to be 6,000 instead of 4,000, I think. But now let's pull up the plate real quick. For our... Yes, because we're going to fly into Quillen, so we're going to want 6,000. So... 6,000. Yeah. Okay. 4,000. flats 5. Full power. See, this is what it was supposed to look like. I don't know what happened to that last weather. Because I was supposed to show you going missed on the non-precision GPS approach, and then show you how we could succeed using the precision GPS approach, but how it's still hard. But I guess this will further showcase that the thing that makes it hard is how low the ceilings are, not the particular approach per se. Okay, so now let's look at this approach plate. So this is the RNAV Zulu. So unlike the RNAV Yankee, this one actually does have vertical guidance, so when we plug in the VNAV in addition to the LNAV on the autopilot. So here, we are going to use our GPS altitude and our barometric altitude combined to automatically descend on a 3.5 degree glide slope, and we are going to get a decision altitude instead of a minimum descent altitude. So rather than having to level off at, let me set this to 4,000.
Sync rate. Sync rate. Sync rate.
Let me make sure that the autopilot's not going to run us into the ground. Okay. So, looking back over here at the approach plate, though, you can see that, like, we're going to have vertical guidance all the way down to our decision altitude. But our decision altitude, well, first of all, it depends on the category of GPS we have here. But, or, I think it's, yeah, on how precise the GPS unit is. But even the lowest one is still 617 feet. So that's actually not even 100 feet lower. Here we are above the cloud layer. What's it doing? Oh. Program this back in. Okay, there we go. Direct to Lindy, and see from there. Okay, so I've set the minimum so low here that there's basically no way we're going to get sight of the runway. But so, in this case, I'm not going to set the altitude to the MDA. I'm going to set it, actually, well, first of all, actually I'm going to leave it at 4,000 for now, just so the autopilot can do its thing. But once we're on final, and it's descending, I'm going to reduce that altitude setting all the way down to below the decision altitude. But if we reach 617 feet and we're on glide slope and we don't have sight of the runway, it's like, that's it, you know, it's time to go missed. And it's unfortunate that we're probably going to go missed while using the precision GPS approach. But this is kind of what I wanted to highlight, is that, yes, there is a precision approach available for runway 27. And as such, it does have a decision altitude, and that decision altitude is lower than the minimum descent altitude for the non-precision approaches. But not by that much. because the buildings are still right there to the left, the hills are still right there to the right, and you still don't want to get too close to them. So yes, there is vertical guidance available from the GPS and the barometric altimeter, but you still got to be pretty careful. And if there's low ceilings, you're still gonna go missed. Uh, I should have just gone missed anyways on that last one, but c'est la vie. Okay. So yeah, like it's the reason that you can stand a better chance on a precision than a non-precision approach isn't just that you are already descending when you reach the decision altitude and don't have to start descending. Uh, and it's not, something that's inherently easier about having vertical guidance, although it definitely is nice. It's that the decision altitude can be lower than the minimum descent altitude, but in this case, they're only different by about 50 feet. And in San Diego, we don't usually have fog unless there is no wind. And if there's no wind, then you can land on runway 9. But as we're about to see, if there is a low, low ceiling below 600 feet, and you are unable to land on runway 9 because the wind is still coming from the west, you're just SOL. And so the thing that really makes it hard is not any one thing, but they do all stem from the same fundamental source, which is the hills directly to the east of runway 27. Or just directly to the east of the airport, by the departure end of runway 27, by the arrival end of runway 27, departure end of runway 9.
Zero, uniform, whiskey. Turn right, heading 310. Turn right, heading 310. Zero, uniform, whiskey.
Okay.
Zero, uniform, whiskey. Fly heading 310. Resume on navigation. Fly heading 3.
Alright, so I'll be down at 3,200. I'm not sure what it's doing. It is continuing to turn to the right. waypoint is to the left. But that's okay. You do your thing, autopilot. You do your thing. We are going to be flight level change. 3,200. We'll let it keep running in LNAV. Oh, no we won't. Yeah, if you get too far off the course, it cancels LNAV,
Bank
and then you
angle,
have to,
bank angle.
there we go. Oh, a mountain. I've ever wondered what those altitudes are for. Why I actually shouldn't have descended below 4,000, but I had previously assumed the autopilot would continue forward, not backwards. Okay, let's get back to LNAV. It should now be reasonably happy to do. Please turn right, please turn right, please turn right. Alright, it's 10. Okay, finally back on track. Now, we still have 2,000. You gotta kind of remind it that it's allowed to descend. We want 2,000. The rebuild waypoint. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Also, arm the spoilers. And good. And now get here. Close. Flaps. There are lights on. Yeah, directions on. The direction close. Okay, depths on. now we can set MCP speed to whatever based on the requirement. You see, now it's going to look like I'm biased against this like GPS approach, but maybe it works out to showcase that it's not whether you're using the precision or the non-precision approach that matters. It's how low the ceilings are. So, non-precision approach, if the ceilings are above 700, you're good to go because you can descend to the MDA, see the runway, and continue your approach. Versus, set that all the way to 0. And remind it that it's allowed to descend. Set it to 100, I guess. So what happens though is we'll reach a point where we're, we're now 3 mile file. Yeah, see, so unless we get below 500 feet, which I really shouldn't do. See, as soon as we hit 600 feet, we're obliged to go mist. Oh man, see, we're seeing it again. I don't know what's up with these ceilings, although look how, isn't that quite the sight breaking out. And, can I actually see the runway? Okay. There's the runway.
400.
Sync rate.
Pick up those pappy lights. This is pretty bad visibility.
Pull up. Pull up. Pull up.
I keep promising you a missed approach, and then I keep getting inside of the runway. Maybe I just need to make the weather work. Alright, well there's only one more to go, which is to show you the other end of the runway, where, you know, we're just gonna keep going lower. So, okay. That's what we'll do this time. So this time, let's start on a 10-mile approach from San Diego. And rather than using, we'll just do the localizer again. And this time, let's bring those ceilings way, 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 way down. Yeah, let's bring that down to, say, F it. Let's just go all the way down to 0. Why not? And let's try that localizer approach again with that MDA of 680 feet. Actually don't know. I haven't spawned an airplane on an approach in X-plane before, actually, because if I want to do that I usually use flight gear. So I don't know how much airspeed it starts you with. I guess we're about to find out. Okay, so let's go back to the localizer approach plate. Keep promising you a missed approach. We're gonna have one. And then we'll do the ILS for runway 9, and then I'll finally be done. Because this is already an hour and a half. Oh, pause. Okay, what does it us? It gives us 9. 2,000 feet of altitude, 167 of airspeed. Let's arm the auto throttle. Ourselves 165. Let's get the flaps down, because it only gives us 160 knots of airspeed. And let's just get the gear down while we're at it. And unpause, speed. Altitude hold 1,000. And let's go back to that approach plate. So we starting at 6.5 miles. We want to descend from 2,000. Let's go ahead. Localizer. Let's change this to 700. Speed brakes again. Alright, so 6.5, we want to start descending at set vertical speed, which we'll set to 0 for now. And when we hit 6.5 miles, I will set that to minus 900. Right, there we go. It's auto brake. There's our airport view. Pretty cloudy. There's our DWS warnings. You can just barely see outside there. Right, so we're coming up on our MDA. We're not going to break through the clouds because I set it to 0. Right, there's 700 feet. I still don't see nothing. And we can go all the way up until, remember, 1.3 DME is where we're obliged to go missed. So keep on looking out the front window until we get to 1.3. So there's 2. I barely see out the side. Remember, it's not enough to see the ground. You have to see the runway specifically. You have to see it by the time you're at the missed approach point. There's 1.5. 4. Still nothing. Because I put the clouds all the way to the ground. Alright, 1.1. There we go. Going missed. Alright, let's fly back out. And where do we climb to? Heading 275 to 2,500 feet. Correct the landing gear. See, you can actually, if you go outside, you can kind of see, but you have to see it from inside the cockpit, right? So, alright, so there you can see it's not a question of just which approach you're using, and they all have very similar altitudes that you can fly at. It's really just how low are the clouds. So okay, but what if there's clouds all the way to the ground, but we don't want to? Nope, I forgot to set for speed mode. Oopsie daisy. It's okay. There's nothing below 700 feet on this end of the runway. Okay, so let's say though we have these clouds all the way down here, but let's say also that there is no wind. So let's change the weather again. And we're going to do one more approach here. Let's keep those. Let's delete all of this surface wind. Delete, delete, delete. Let's just delete all the wind below 10,000 feet, but let's keep this overcast layer. In fact, let's make it thicker. And keep that going all the way to the ground. Although let's keep it going all the way to the ground. And let me show you the ILS approach going from the other side. And the key thing with that ILS approach, it's not that it's just that it's an ILS, and it's not just that it's more precise, although the ILS is more precise. It's that there's not as many obstacles to clear on that side of the runway. Remember, the highest obstacle on that side is like 150 feet, and it's located like 2 miles away from the end of the runway. So here we have a decision altitude, and this hashtag is to note several notes up here, one of which is that the approach lighting has to be present or you cannot use this approach. But nonetheless, this has a minimum of, this has a decision altitude of 258 feet, which is much, 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 much lower. So we should be able to make it in even despite the presence of this overcast layer going all the way to the ground. Okay, let's go to approach, runway 9, 10 miles, confirm. And the reason I didn't do that with all the other approaches is because the computer will kind of freak out if you don't let it go through its waypoints. And you have to go direct to a waypoint that's less than 10 nautical miles for those to work. Load for a second. Oh, pause. Okay, so now we also need to change the ILS frequency because we have, instead of 110.9, we have 11155. So 11155. Change frequencies. Go back to approach mode. And let's change our heading to 095, which is the heading here. Heading select, A, altitude hold, speed, and compass. And let's go ahead and arm approach mode. And because we spawned in place, we're already centered on the localizer of runway 9. So runway 9, remember, does have a full ILS. So let me drop the flaps. And here. Drop our speed. So we're going to go 2,000 feet until we intercept the glide slope from below. See, we're all nice and configured here. Oh, except for our landing lights. Might want those when it's cloudy out. So even though we have clouds, all right, there we go, intercepted the glide slope. So now we're going to start descending. Let's arm our spoilers again. this auto brake. Five. So I think this approach actually starts at how far? 5 miles? 7.3. Okay. But we intercepted the glide slope long before that. Oh, a little high. Okay, the autopilot will deal with that. Although maybe help along it so it's going a little faster. Let's see what the passenger seat looks like here. Still very bumpy. I guess I should set all the lights too. Actually, they're already, aren't they? Let's just turn them off now. Oh, that's cheating. Okay, so remember, MDA is 200 feet, and we're currently at 900, so we are Uchi. So we can go all the way down. On this one, we can go all the way down to 200 feet. The autopilot's keeping us a little high, which I'm not super happy with, but it's doing what it's doing. I might just disconnect and hand fly, actually. Actually, let's just make auto throttle, too. Alright, I got side of the ground. We're a little high, so we should get side of the runway very shortly. Alright, there we go. Now we're on glide slope. Oh, now we're low. So we can go down to 200 feet. We're at 300 now. And there's the runway.
Sink rate. Pull up. Pull up.
And this is not my best work, but you get the idea. You can get sight of the runway, even in much worse weather coming from the other direction, because you can descend to a much lower altitude because of the combination of the obstacle height and the presence of a ILS glide slope antenna. Alright, so there you have it. That's how you can land even in fairly adverse weather, coming from runway 09. And so, really, what makes it hard to land at San Diego International is not any one thing, but everything that makes it hard stems from the same root cause, which is the hills on the east side of the airport, and the fact that the wind is almost always blowing from the west. So the side of the runway that's easy to land, the runway that's easy to land on, same piece of tarmac, but, landing on runway 09, so facing to the east, is easy because there's no terrain in your way, and there's a nice glide slope antenna so that you can get down very low, even in very poor visibility, and so that even in very poor visibility, you can see the runway without going missed. However, the wind is blowing the direction, you can't use it. And at San Diego, we frequently have low ceilings and wind blowing from the west. And when that happens, you're just SOL. So it's not the hardest airport in the world to land at, but there's a lot of traffic. There's only one runway. There's hills to the east of the airport. There is a precision GPS approach available, but it has a glide slope of 3.5 degrees, which is steeper than average, and almost all of the approaches that you can use under those bad conditions have either decision altitudes or minimum descent altitudes that are fairly high. And between all of those things, it's pretty dicey. That being said, when the weather is nice, it is an absolutely stunning approach, and it's actually quite enjoyable, both as a passenger and as a pilot, although I've actually only seen it as a passenger, except in the simulator, where, as you can see, I'm not the world's best pilot because I'm not accustomed to flying airliners, but I needed to use the airliners for their what's it called? The FMC computer, which I guess is like saying ATM machine. So yeah, there you have it. That was a much, much, much more long-winded explanation than the 10-minute version, but also sort of explains what's like really hard about it, which, you know, has to do more with the combination of factors. And I noticed I also flew this whole thing with no air traffic, because that's the other thing, is that San Diego is the busiest single runway airport in the world, strictly speaking. Um, there's also London Gatwick, which is technically less busy, or is technically has two runways and is more busy, but one of those runways is not really usable for airliners. Um, engines off, bring in the jetway. Um, so yeah, um, but you'll notice we did all of this with without any air traffic control, which is because there was no other air traffic, right? There's all these sort of like graphical only airplanes, but you can drive right through any of these, and it won't. There's no like physics model that models any sort of air-to-air collision. So we had the entire airspace to ourselves this entire time. So imagine trying to do all of this. Well, there's also a bunch of other airplanes that are all having the same problem, also trying to land, and there's only one runway to even make attempts. It can get pretty hairy. So, anyways, that's yeah, what are we at? 2.5 probably. Oh no. 1 hour and 56-minute long. More in-depth explanation of why landing at San Diego International is, fairly difficult. But it is also quite spectacular to see the buildings. It's just, if we have low ceilings and westerly winds, which we frequently do, it can get kind of hard.